Hey everyone, today I'll be talking about Mark Dvoretsky's Endgame manual, a very popular Endgame book, and recommended by many experts of our time. Many of the famous grandmasters all consult or have read the Mark Dvoretsky Endgame manual, and it's considered fairly advanced. But I will try to explain as much as possible and learn with everyone as we go on with this with a study of the book, the Endgame Manual, because I myself have not finished it yet. But anyway, today I plan to start right directly into chapter one of the Dvoretsky's Endgame Manual, and in its content. Now, it is important to note that if one were to read the Endgame Manual, the vocabulary and the terminologies used are quite advanced. Um, and oftentimes it is quite hard to read um, for most people. I imagine that's precisely why it's considered quite an advanced material. So I hope in that I hope that I'm able to summarize or simplify the contents of the book uh, by giving these online lessons. Anyway, let's get on with the chapter one, which is the first part of chapter one, which is on pawn endgames in key squares. So we first begin with the simplest one, shown in many books. The 100 endgames you must know, um, Jeremy Silman's endgame, complete endgames, is the famous pawn endgame where here white has one pawn and the king is in front of the pawn. So the white pawn is on d4, the king is on d5, and the black king is on d7. Here there are two options that can happen. One, if white is to move, this is drawn, and if black is to move, this is winning for white. The precise reasons is because of these key squares in this position. If white ever gets to advance into these key squares, then um, black has to be forced back, and then as he enters, shoulders the king away and advances the pawn. So I'll demonstrate here. If it is black to move, black is forced to play, let's say king e7. Then you play into these one of these key squares. Well, the only option here is king c6. Then if king e8, you can play d5. Let's say king d8, d king d8, king d6, shouldering again, having the opposition here. Now the black king is to move and is forced to retreat into one of these squares. So if king c8, you advance again king e7, king c7, d6 check, king c6, d7, king, let's say king c5, whatever, d8 queen. So now it's just a simple queen endgame, queen and rook king endgame, which is clearly winning. So it's important to understand that you need to have these key squares in front of the king. So for example, if it is if it is white to move, white plays, let's say king e5, black follows with king e7, king comes back with d5, king d7, king c5, king c7, king d5, king d7. There is no way for white to make progress here, unless of course black all of a sudden chooses to retreat, and then you have the chance of advancing to the key squares again. So as black, you should not make these kind of mistakes if it is of course white to move in this position. But uh, but of course, if it's black to move, then this is clearly a winning endgame. So now we proceed on to the second chapter. Not the second chapter. The second part of the key squares, first component of the chapter. So in this position, we have a slightly different position here. Again, the king is in front of the pawn, and you have a king on b8. Here, there is one move that wins. Here for white, if no matter what, no matter whether this is white to move or black to move, this is winning for white because you need to shoulder the king away from the a8 square. Because let's say if you play king c6, which is fine. Let's say king a7. If you play b6 check, king a8, b7 check, king b8, and this is just stalemate. King b6 and the black king has nowhere to go. So that is why you cannot make such brash decisions and play those moves. But anyway, king c6 is not losing just yet. It's not drawn just yet or stalemate, because you have the chance to once again return to the same position. So let's say king c6, king a7, king c7, king a8, king b6, king ba. So you return back to the same position. And so if you ever made the mistake of playing king c6, you have the opportunity to return to the winning position once again. So actually the move here is actually king a6. Why? Because king a6, let's say king a8, b6, king b8, b7, king c7, king a7, and then queening. So the black king is shouldered out via the opposition of king a6 and king a8. So let's say king a8, king c7, b6, king c8, king a7, king b7. Okay, then this is just clearly winning. You're gonna promote the pawn. So always be careful with these endgames. This one subtle detail can change the whether you are winning or not. But anyway, let's continue to one example of a game. Just don't mind these. Anyway, of a game of a study actually. And here the king is on d1. This is white to move. King d1 and b4 and king f8. So here naturally you want to approach your pawn as fast as possible. So you play king c2. If king c2, king e7, and then king b3, king d6. Here you have two options. Do you play king a3, king a4, or king c4? And these two subtleties make a whole lot of difference. If I play king c4, this is just drawn. King c6, b5 check. Let's say I play king b6, and here you have white has no way to make progress. Let's go king b7, king c7, then king c7, b6 check, king b8, king b5, king b8, king c6, king a8, b7, and then it will return to the same position here, which is the stalemate from before. So here white cannot play white once plays b3, king d6, cannot play king c4. Instead, they must go king a4, and that same subtle difference changes the position entirely. Because after king c6, you have king a5 shouldering the king away. King b7, the only way to try to make for a draw here, and then you have king b5. Here this position is winning because it is black to move, and black must retreat, must go into one of these squares. And let's say if I play this, there's just this. And if king a6, just b5, king a7, king c7, shouldering. Remember the opposition here. King a8, king a8, king b6, king b8, and then we return to the same position once again, where you play king a6 and you win. So in this position, if I were to play b6, this game is just stalemated. So be careful not to play such moves. And remember to not stalemate in a clearly winning position. Anyway, so here you had to play king a4 in order to win the game. Otherwise, it would have been drawn. Very interesting game. Anyway, let's proceed to the next one here. This is an example. This was a game played between Cole versus Stansfield, 1988. Olympiad. This was Scotland's board one. White was Cole, the female tournament, and Cole was playing for the Scotland board one. Here, this position is black to move, and here, well, there's not much to do here. If king e5, let's say king c3, king takes d5, and essentially you lose the pawn. There's no way to defend your d5 pawn because it's black to move. And here actually Cole resigned, and this is quite surprising, a quite surprising result because, well, try to find out why using the knowledge we learned from just previously. Say if black plays king e5, king e5, let's say king c3, king takes d5. Now I play the move king d3, and this is like the same thing as before, where this is now black to move, and black cannot make progress because white can just follow, and white will never advance into retreat into these squares, allowing black to advance and um, gain these key squares. So this position is just drawn because after, let's say, king c5, king c3, king d5, king d3, king e5, king e3, this position is just completely drawn. There is no way for black to make progress. So instead of resigning, this game could have just ended in a draw. Quite an unfortunate result. Anyway, let's go on to this one. This is a very fascinating one by J. Moravec, 1952. Here, this is white to move, and this position is actually winning for white. And there is a very specific way for you to do this. Our first instinct is to go and go on to collect these pawns. There are two ways we can do that. Collect this black pawn. Let's say king g1 might be a good option here. Let's see what happens with king g1. So king g1, king d7, king h2, king e6, king h3, king f5, king h4, king g6, and the king is right in time to defend this pawn. So let's say if I play g4, h takes g4, king g4, this is just drawn in the game. So actually this position was drawn if I played king g1, even though it was the most natural move. So instead king f2 is played. If king f2 is played, king f2 is played, king d7, king g3, let's say king a6, king h4, king f5, king takes h5, let's say king f4, there's just g4, and you're advancing. And if let's say king here, just g4 is fine. Then let's say king g here, king g5, and this is winning because black now has to retreat into one of these squares and white can advance. So what if instead of king d7, h4 is played. Here the most natural move is playing king f3, but king f3 is drawn because of h3. And if you try to collect the pawn king g3, just h takes g2, king g2, this is drawn. So white cannot play king f3. Instead, white actually has to go back, king g1. Because if king g1, h3, now this is very key. If you take h takes g3, let's say king d7, h4, king e7, king e6, king h2, king d5, king f5, king h3, king e6, king g4, king e7, king f5, king f7, h5, king f8, king g4, king g6, king g8, king here, king here. This is just drawn. There's no way for, because this is a rook pawn, there is no way for white to make progress. This is an important distinction one must make. That if it's a rook pawn, after g takes h3, this position is actually drawn. There is no way for white to make progress, but granted, it requires very precise play on black side, maneuvering, and making sure that black and white obtain a opposition. So in that sense, it's a very difficult position to defend. But anyway, instead of that, if g4, the black king can actually come sooner. Let's see, g4, king d7, king h2, king e6, king takes h2, king f7, king h4, king g6, sorry, king g6, and this is drawn. Remember that position from before, where white cannot make any progress, and will reach the position of stalemate after pushing the pawn to g7. So instead of that, white has to play g3, because after king d7, king h2, king e6, king takes h3, king f6, king h4, king g6, king g4. That is key distinction here now, because black has to go here. If he goes king f6, then you have king h5, and if black goes king g7, you have king g5, and let's say king here, then you have king h6, and black goes here, then you push the pawn, king h8, push, king g8, king g6. Now you have the key idea of going back at king a8. Now king f7 wins, because after king f7, king h7, g6, king h8, g7, and then you just go promote. So the key distinction there was that you needed to play g3, and it's a key subtlety, because the black king cannot arrive and obtain opposition that results in a winning endgame. So that was a very, very interesting one there. So there were a lot of moves that ended up in draws, and there was only a single one that allowed white to win. So now we proceed on to the next one. A short example here. Here, this was Spielman versus Duras in Carlsbad 1907. Here, this is white to move. And guess what move white made here? Because this position is understandably drawn. One can play king g4 and a two rook endgame. This is easy to defend for white. Instead here, Spielman played rook f4, which immediately loses, because after rook f4 there's king g5, rook takes f5, king takes f5, and this position is lost, because white has to go into one of these squares and black can advance. So this is a losing pawn endgame. White completely blundered that and lost the game, resign immediately. So that's one example of what you shouldn't do by blocking the rook here. Simply moving the king g4 would have ensured a draw. So anyway, that wraps up one part of the Dvoretsky's Endgame manual, one part of the chapter. So these endgames are very important for any gameplay really in chess, rapid, time format, classical especially. and endgames are must know for for any player who wants to improve their game and take their game to the next level. So anyways, thank you for watching. Leave a comment down below for any suggestions and subscribe and like the video. Thank you.